Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? All right, today we're taking a look at the event where Alan Moore was trying to transition the Extreme Studios universe into a unified, awesome entertainment universe. With all new concepts that Alan Moore came up with himself, and I guess theoretically he intended to script all of them as well. That didn't exactly happen, but at least this event got finished, so we're going to take a look at the whole thing. We're looking at Judgment Day today. So this is going to be another milestone video because I just hit 7,000 subscribers. I just want to point out that we're coming up on the 4th anniversary of the channel, and at the beginning of this year, I was at around 3,500 subscribers. So since January, the channel size has doubled. It's been a little bit crazy. So thank you guys very much for everybody who subscribed. It's really helped to kind of grow the channel, which is not really something I ever expected to see. Like, not at this rate. It's been kind of awesome. So we'll do this as we traditionally do, where we do a little bit of backstory first, and then we jump into the comic itself. If you want to skip the intro, feel free. There's chapters in the description. So the Judgment Day event is very interesting because this marks the actual transition point from Rob Liefeld's Maximum Press to Awesome Entertainment. A big part of why this parting of the ways happened was because of Rob's decision to kind of branch away from Image Comics. Traditionally, he'd published everything he came up with through Image Comics. You know, that was kind of the deal. That's what everybody did. Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Todd McFarlane, all of them. Rob Liefeld decided he was sick of having everything he was doing tied to Image Comics and wanted some money coming in that didn't have anything to do with that. So he started up Maximum Press. He still kept some titles with Image, and he kept publishing those books. But then there were other books that he put out completely separate, such as Evangeline, War Child. There were a few of them. And he may or may not have used some Image funds to get himself started with Maximum. That seems to have been a point of contention. I'm not saying whether or not that actually happened because there's no way to confirm that, having not been in the room. Some of the other Image founders seem to think that was the case. Rob, of course, says it absolutely wasn't. And it was settled in a lawsuit back in 1996, but I don't know what the findings of that was. So anyway, in 1996, Rob was an independent publisher at that point for the first time. He was an independent publisher in kind of an interesting position because he had, his own name, for one thing, which was a draw in and of itself. He had a bunch of properties that were at least recognizable, if not exactly time-honored. And he had some recognizable creators in his stable, chief among whom was Alan Moore. The guy who wrote some of the best comics in history. At that point, Alan Moore was working with Rob Liefeld exclusively. And Rob seemed to be able to keep him in the fold basically for two reasons. One, he paid him an exorbitant amount of money. By the sound of it, the cost of working with Alan Moore was $10,000 per script, and Alan Moore was delivering 3 scripts a week. And second, Rob Liefeld did not interfere whatsoever in anything that Alan Moore wanted to do. Alan Moore's most recent work before this was working on Jim Lee's Wildcats. And while I imagine that was more rewarding than working for Marvel or DC, not nearly the kind of bureaucratic red tape as working for the big two, it did still have its own problems. I mean, I'm sure that he couldn't kill off any characters, really, unless he came up with a very good reason for it. The primary thing, I think, is that working for Jim Lee meant that you were subject to whatever crossover Wildstorm decided to do on an annual basis, and they kept cranking those things out. I'm currently going through the end of Alan Moore's Wildcats run, and there was a point where the story that he had been building up for like a year all of a sudden got interrupted by the Fire from Heaven crossover, which didn't have anything to do with anything, ground everything to a complete halt, and then he had to kind of shift gears again and try and get readers back into this story that he had been building momentum on. That didn't happen working with Rob Liefeld. I'll rag on Liefeld all day, every day, and I kind of do. But Rob does have his good points, and one of them is that when he recognizes star talent, he stays the fuck out of the way. He makes sure they get paid on time, and he makes sure they're happy because he wants them to stick around and keep making him money. So, the first thing that Alan Moore worked on with Rob, the first thing I think was Violator Bad Rock, but the first thing that he worked on in like a partnership kind of scenario was on Supreme. And the idea on Supreme was to take the main character and completely change him from what his original story was so that he was a more close Superman analog. And this is a character that Rob Liefeld had had around for 40 issues at that point. I could totally see a world where Rob goes, well, I'd rather if you didn't change him completely, I came up with the original idea. I thought the idea was pretty good. I'd like you to kind of work within the bounds of that original idea. But Rob didn't do that shit. Rob's like, I get to have Alan Moore on my book. Alan Moore can do whatever the fuck he wants on my book. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding because Alan Moore did whatever the fuck he wanted on that book. He turned it into an homage to Silver Age Superman stories like the Kurt Swan type. And he did that for, I want to say, like 20, 25 issues. And like really good issues that got a lot of praise. Rob Liefeld has said that is the only book that has ever won him an award. I don't remember if it was an Eagle or an Eisner. It was one of those. It didn't make him any money, I don't think, at all. The circulation numbers on that book were dire. But Rob didn't particularly care because, for one thing, he did have this exclusive deal going on with Alan Moore, and nobody else could really claim that. For another thing, I think he saw it as an investment. The book's numbers at the beginning weren't very good, but that was bound to improve once, word got out that these awesome stories were taking place in a Rob Liefeld-owned property. Of course, that never really happened. The problem wasn't so much Alan Moore or the awesome stories. It was the Rob Liefeld-owned property that seemed to keep driving everybody away. But that's a bit of a tangent we don't need to get down just now. Getting back to Alan Moore, at one point, he and Rob Liefeld agreed that Alan Moore would propose a complete rewrite of the Extreme Studios universe. At least 3 titles of which we know, in Youngblood, in Glory, and in Supreme. Glory number 1 and 2 actually did come out at one point. Not for Awesome Entertainment, but we're not going to talk about that today. That's a matter for another date. But the ideas for these new reboots were going to be very different from the previous iteration. And they kind of had to be, actually, because part of the point of doing these reboots gets back to the lawsuits that were flying between Image Comics and Rob Liefeld. Part of that whole deal was that Image was claiming that some of Rob Liefeld's assets were the communal property of Image Comics. Like, yes, he had some ownership rights on characters, character names, the character designs, some team names, that kind of thing. But Image was arguing that the line was very muddy on what should be determined as, owned by Rob versus owned by Image, because Image had always published all of Rob's comics. So part of the retooling was to make the Awesome Entertainment versions of Rob Liefeld's characters more legally distinct from the Image Comics versions. So Alan Moore came up with all of these new concepts. He was all set to write these new books, and the transitional method he was going to use to midwife Rob's creations from Image/Maximum to Awesome Entertainment was Judgment Day. So that was a long and rambly way of getting here, but now we can finally talk about the comic. So let's get into it. We can start with the cover. There are multiple cover variations on each issue of Judgment Day. This is around the time when Rob Liefeld is starting to realize that variant covers can be used to drive more sales. And so for some reason, I got the Gil Kane versions of the covers. I assume the thinking that I had was that I wanted to complete the triptych that the Gil Kane covers represented. So there was that. The third one doesn't do it. Okay, well, it's like that anyway. I probably should have checked that. That's just silly. I mean, you can see the whole thing on the back of the third one. That's something. I kind of liked the fact that we got the entire covers here without all of the accoutrement. Oh, well. But these are the Gil Kane versions, which are cool. And I mean, I kind of dig having these versions. But I don't know why I wouldn't get the Rob Liefeld versions, thinking about it. I mean, particularly the cover for issue 2, which is fucking ridiculous. But we'll cover that when we get there, I guess. I mean, you can tell exactly what the deal is right from issue 1 here. This is going to contain everybody who was in the Extreme Studios universe, everybody that was in Maximum, everybody that is, I suppose, going to be in Awesome, as well as all the characters that Alan Moore is creating solely for the purpose of this particular event. It's a pretty ambitious series of covers, kind of on the level of something that George Perez might do. Kind of. It would be tighter if George Perez was doing it. But it's still a good idea for a cover, and it's well executed. It does mean that this first issue here doesn't look like much of anything. The front cover, that's the only drawback. As a complete image, it looks pretty great. Really, I mean, that's the kind of thing you can put on a trade paperback, for sure, and be like, yo, look at this highly detailed cover, it's so cool. But in single issue form, it's a bunch of guys, most of whom are not recognizable. There's a couple at least. There's Super Patriot, there's Shaft, there's Vogue. That might be about it. You don't know what any of them are looking at. Is that Night Strike? Night? I don't think he's in this comic, actually. Most of the characters on the cover are the characters that Alan Moore created for this event. Anyway, yeah, I mean, it's okay. I like the idea more than I like the actual cover, I think. So first thing we're going to get is our credits on the inside cover here. And the first thing you're going to notice is that there is a litany of names here. So naturally, we've got Alan Moore as the writer. We've got Rob Liefeld listed as the penciler, which is kind of right. And we've got Jonathan Sabal listed as the inker. No trace of Danny Meeke anywhere on this. I imagine that, part of the deal with Rob being an independent publisher now is that he can't afford to pay Danny Meeke rates anymore. At least not the kind of rates that he was able to afford back when he was using image money. Jonathan Sabal is fine. He obviously doesn't have the finish of a guy like Danny Meeke, but he can get the job done. And then we got a whole bunch of names down here, and this is flashback sequences. So the deal in this is that there's going to be a bridging kind of element that's going to run throughout the entire issue. That's the bit that's going to be drawn by Rob Liefeld. Everything else is going to be a flashback sequence, and they brought in different artists for every flashback. So this is kind of an ambitious project, really. You look at some of the names here. We start with Gil Kane. Then we get Stephen Platt and Joe Weems. We get Keith Giffen and Bill Ray. We get Adam Polina and Jonathan Sabal. I don't know how many people know Adam Polina. He's pretty good. Back in the 90s when I was making mini comics, I managed to get in on a couple of signing things. First one was a convention, and the guy who was headlining that was Adam Polina. I remember he brought some uninked pages with him, and I took a look at those and went, oh, that's what pencils look like. So I'm never going to be a penciler then. Okay, good to know. And to wrap up, we've also got Dan Jurgens and Al Gordon. Special thanks to Dave Gibbons, Merritt Michaels, and Rick Veitch. Those are three names on the same level, right? I have no idea what that's about. Maybe page layouts? Who knows? But yeah, an element that I talked about in my last video about Youngblood #1 from 2017 was that when Rob Liefeld wanted to start up Awesome Entertainment, he didn't have the money to fund it by himself. Starting up a business like that using only your own funds is kind of a crazy proposition. So he went to Scott Rosenberg, who was the ex-publisher for Malibu Comics. And Scott Rosenberg did agree to give him his startup money. He did require some collateral, and that collateral ended up being the rights to Youngblood. And that, in a long roundabout kind of way, is how Rob Liefeld ended up losing the rights to Youngblood. But I imagine a decent part of those initial funds went towards bringing in all of these artists for these flashback sequences. The rest went to publishing and legal fees, but this is a lot of names to pay off. They only do a few pages each for the most part. But still, bringing in guys like Gil Kane, Stephen Platt ain't cheap. Dan Jurgens, he's commanding a page rate at this point, right? So yeah, interesting stuff. Okay, so we can get started here. So we're going to start in 1997. The establishing of the date is important because of all the jumping around in the timeline that we're going to be doing. So we start things off with the character of Night Saber. So Night Saber is, it's his 30th birthday, and he's been out getting drunk and feeling sorry for himself. He stumbles back to Youngblood headquarters, which appears to be in a building on a street, in downtown somewhere. You sure? I kind of like the idea that, you might go downtown shopping for shoes, only you go in the wrong door and there's Sentinel sitting behind a desk there. But yeah, Sentinel's sitting behind a desk there, and him and Night Saber just kind of nod at each other, and Night Saber stumbles off to the elevator. Night Saber notes that Sentinel is writing away at something, figures it's probably some kind of log or report, something like that. But Sentinel writing something is going to be important, so it's worth taking note of. The pages here, the page is a little bit of a mess. I got to find myself wondering if Alan Moore did the usual Alan Moore thing, which is to provide his artist with page layouts. If he did, I get the impression he eventually gave up because, this is some kind of adventurous stuff for Rob Liefeld. This is an extreme angle right here that Rob doesn't really pull off of, Night Saber stumbling into the office. And later on, we're going to get much more Liefeld-esque compositions, I think. With far less focus on background. Like, you look at all the background in this first panel here. That's almost surprising. It's not, it's not great or anything, but it's okay. And you wouldn't expect that. So Night Saber's waiting for the elevator, and yeah, he's in his feelings because he doesn't have any real friends. All he has are teammates. His teammates don't even know his real name. He goes by the name of Mickey Toombs. That's not his actual name. It's more of a pseudonym. There is the fact that he's getting older. That bugs him a bit too. And there's the fact that Night Saber hasn't gotten laid since New Year's. That's Got him feel a little bit anxious, you know what I mean? So he takes the elevator up, and while he's in the elevator, he gets the absolutely terrible idea that maybe one of the girls, like the super girls that are on one of the Youngblood teams, might be a little bit interested. At first he thinks of Masada, and then he's like, no, that'd be a bad idea because she's even more fucked up than I am. And then he thinks of Riptide, and it's like, yeah, she's nice, and, she's like, a beach babe. Maybe she'd be, I don't know, a little bit more friendly. So he wanders over to Riptide's room, and he knocks on the door, doesn't get an answer, so he just kind of pushes himself in and calls out hello, and nobody answers. Lights are all out. When he tries flicking the switch, nothing happens. And he goes walking further in. And while he's walking, he notices that the carpet's all wet under his feet. Figures maybe she spilled her coffee. And eventually he makes his way to her bedroom. And at this point, he's kind of done for the night. Like, yeah, he might have come here with amorous intent, but like about now he's realizing that that wouldn't be possible anyway. So about all he can manage is to collapse onto Riptide's bed and quickly fall unconscious. These pages are okay in terms of storytelling, which again makes me think maybe Alan Moore had a hand in them. I don't think Rob Liefeld's going to think of the shot of Night Saber leaning in the elevator here, the shot of Night Saber's feet as he's walking down what I guess is a hall, a funhouse mirror hall maybe. The long shot here of him stumbling into her bedroom and having to draw all sorts of cabinets and desks in different kinds of perspective. Come on, Rob. Like, it's not that hard. Read a fucking book. So from there, we're immediately going to cut to a flashback sequence. There are going to be an awful lot of those transitions that Alan Moore kind of got famous for doing, particularly during, I think, The Killing Joke, where, he makes a statement at the bottom of one page that kind of links to a scene transition on the next page. So here we've got the sensations in his numb body get further away, his thoughts get muddier, the dark gets darker. And then we transition to 1868, where the storm is gathering. That's not so much of a direct transition. We're going to get more obvious ones. So now we're going to harken back to like 50s type cowboy comics. There's a lot of kind of paying homage to different genres and different eras of comics history in this particular event. It's interesting because of the properties that Alan Moore was working on when he was coming up with the revamped version of the Extreme Studios line. Rob Liefeld has noted that the three main ones, Youngblood, Glory, and Supreme, all bore striking resemblances to concepts that he came up with later for his ABC line in Top 10, Promethea, and Tom Strong. And I mean, looking at them, honestly, it's a case of yes and no. Like, I think Rob wants to imply a bit more malicious intent there than is actually there. His biggest argument is probably the transition from Glory to Promethea. From what I understand, there was a lot of stuff that was come up with for Glory that got translated directly into Promethea, or was very close to. For Tom Strong and Top 10, those are more like conceptual kind of similarities, I think, much more tenuously linked. There is another link, though, that I think needs to be addressed in this event, which is the idea of past literature being referenced and used in a comic book format. He's going to do an awful lot of that in this event, and that's kind of what he transmuted into League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. So, like I said, that's interesting. It's just kind of, there's so much groundwork that got laid for the ABC line back in the days of Awesome Entertainment. I just don't think it's as direct as Liefeld claims. I think it's more concepts that he came up with at this time. He kept working and tinkering with until they became much more refined later on. Anyway, we're getting away from the comic here. We should get back to the comic. So this is going to be the Kid Thunder sequence. I don't think Kid Thunder is a direct comparable to a previous work. It's more kind of a genre comparable. Does it fuck you up that I just used two pronunciations of the word comparable? It fucks me up. Anyway, we've got three main characters here. We've got Kid Thunder, we've got Brimstone, and we've got Night Eagle. And so Night Eagle and Brimstone are meeting up with Kid Thunder. Kid Thunder has apparently just stolen some important item from another character, Deliverance Drew. Deliverance Drew is a direct analog to guys like, I think it's Solomon Kane. I'm not too familiar with the character, but I kind of know about him. So Kid Ride's going to show off the thing that he stole from Deliverance Drew. As soon as he opens the case, Brimstone and Night Eagle are like, holy shit, is that full of magic? I don't want anything to do with that. And they immediately take off, leaving Kid Thunder to deal with Deliverance Drew when he inevitably tracks Kid Thunder down. So yeah, this is a weird little sequence that kind of comes out of nowhere and doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything. Obviously it does. It's going to tie in directly with the main storyline. But it's kind of an oddly awkward placement because there's really no linking element to this whatsoever. There's no reason to suspect that this story has anything to do with the main story. I think anybody who picks this book up, they're going to know it's an Alan Moore book, and he's got enough goodwill that they're going to go along with it at least for now. It's only a 4-page sequence. It's just a little bit strange reading an Alan Moore book and, kind of being taken out of it for a second because something feels kind of clumsily done. And the art on this sequence is going to be done by Gil Kane. And Gil Kane is the only credit for the art, so I guess he does both pencils and inks. I do like Gil Kane's pencils. I really like Gil Kane's covers, particularly from the 70s. He's got some absolutely wild Luke Cage covers, I gotta say. One thing I find I do not like, though, is Gil Kane's inks. I don't know what he's using, but the lines he's coming up with are thick and ugly, and I don't know why. The page layouts are all good. The initial shot here showing our 3 main characters, it's nice and big. We can see everybody fairly clearly. Maybe not Night Eagles so much, but we're going to, that's fairly clear too. All the stuff here where Kid Thunder is taking out the case and showing off to his buddies, that's all fairly clear. And then we get the nice dynamic shot of Brimstone and Night Eagle riding away. That's all good stuff. If it wasn't all buried under these thick, ugly lines, I think I'd like it a lot more. It's a tough thing to say because, like I said, I do like Gil Kane. But I don't know, something about him inking himself just doesn't sit well with me. Like, you look at some of the lines he's got here in this cave, and like just how thick, like it looks like it's inked with a Sharpie. Oddly, some of these lines actually feel a little bit like Dave Gibbons. Some of this hatching, which makes me wonder a little bit if Dave Gibbons had anything to do with inking this. It's possible, I suppose. If he did, I don't like the job he did. Whoever inked this, no, I don't like it. So anyway, Kid Thunder is left to his own devices to try and defend himself against Deliverance Drew. So he finds himself a cave that he's going to hole up in, and he's going to try and ambush him. And while he's doing this, naturally, he's talking to himself the entire time. And he's kind of theorizing as to why Deliverance Drew wants this item so badly. And he speculates that maybe this has something to do with why Deliverance Drew is so long-lived and kind of has a reputation for being invincible. And, after he gets himself set up, and once he gets himself set up, that's when Deliverance Drew comes calling. So Deliverance Drew is a Puritan like Solomon Kane. He travels around the Old West dealing out God's justice to, like, devil worshippers and witches and shit like that, I think. And we end the sequence here with Kid Thunder getting ready for the ambush. And he's kind of, trying to steady his horse, going, guess we got no choice but set up here and wait for him to find us. Things look bad, girl, and I don't think they'll look a whole lot better come the morning, as he puts out his candle. So that's a proper setup for a transition, and we get it as we flash back to 1997, and Night Saber wakes up. And first thing he notices when he wakes up is he hears some voices. Opens his eyes, and he sees Vogue and Badrock and Masada standing in front of him, and they seem to be in deep conversation about something important. And they're asking him, what the fuck are you doing here? Why are you in Riptide's room? And obviously he's still woozy. He's going to be very hungover. And Badrock's like, give us some answers, you shifty little creep. So Badrock's immediately gotten hostile. Night Saber has no idea why. And he's like, look, what's the problem? I got too fucking drunk and I fell asleep in Riptide's room. Okay, I know that's kind of bad form, but it's not some major fucking offense. And then he kind of, comes to a bit more, looks around the room, and this is meant to be the room covered in blood. It's like, okay, I guess that's what that is. I think this might be around the time where Alan Moore realizes that page layouts are going to be kind of worthless, because this feels much more like a Rob kind of page. So anyway, yeah, he notices the room's covered in blood. He notices he's got blood on his hands. Again, that's what blood on your hands looks like. And, his Youngblood teammates seem to be accusing him of something. And he's like, okay, what exactly happened? Like, what's Riptide saying? Is she saying, like, I assaulted her or something? Like, I might not remember what happened last night, but I think I'd remember something like that. And that pisses Badrock off. Vogue's like, look, Riptide isn't saying fucking anything. And Night Saber's getting himself worked up. He's like, no, if she's making accusations, I want to hear them. She can say them to my fucking face. Masada's trying to calm him down, and he shoves past her into the next room. And so we actually see the next room. It's all trashed, and it looks like Riptide is dead with a couch on top of her. And decent looking hand here, which makes me suspect Rob didn't draw it, Either got some help, traced it off as something, or, maybe used photo reference. Photo reference seems the least likely because that would take the most effort. And Night Saber is naturally shocked by the sight of the corpse here. As we can tell by this panel here with his mile-long legs and his jazz hands. and the two tiny women standing on his calves. That represents like the angel and the devil standing on his shoulder, see? So Masada is going to escort Nightstrike back to his room, and she's going to find him some tranquilizers to kind of, relax him for a little bit. Meanwhile, Vogue and Badrock are going to have a little bit of a discussion about what exactly they should do about this. Badrock is still like a 16-year-old kid in a big Rockman body, which makes it even more unsettling that he walks around in a fucking banana hammock. But, his first instinct naturally is, we got to call the police. Vogue kind of argues that no, that's not what we do in this case because we're super people. This is outside the bounds of normal police jurisdiction. We need to take care of this in-house. If it gets out what happened here, this is going to start a media circus. And we get the line here, the world sees us as titans, like your movie stars, but even more so. There has never been a superhero murder before. To your media, this will be a primal event, an ancient drama acted out by beings stepped from legend. Again, we're just kind of teeing those transitions up. So here we go. We're going to go into legend, 436 AD, specifically into the history of Bram the Berserk, who is very clearly an analog of Conan. Only Alan Moore goes out of his way to mention how this particular barbarian, like when he goes into battle, he ingests a whole bunch of drugs first. So it's not Conan the adventurer so much as Conan the coke-addled psychopath, as he screams about blood and souls for Wotan. So in case you couldn't tell, this particular flashback sequence is going to be penciled by Stephen Platt. And it's kind of awesome. It's like the first really awesome thing we've seen in this comic. Over the course of this 3-issue series, there's going to be a lot of nice visual sequences. The Stephen Platt pages really do stand out as a highlight, though. So, Bram the Berserk is hacking and slashing his way into the eyrie of his nemesis, which is Magnar Tufelson. So Magnar apparently is a sorcerer who has conquered the land, and he has all of these underlings that are described as both trolls and kobolds. And they kind of do his bidding. So Bram is invading and is with the intention of, probably inflicting some kind of harm on him by the looks of it. And yeah, these pages kind of kick ass. We get our guy here in his heroic pose. It's kind of an update of a Frank Frazetta Conan type pose where you've got your triangular composition where everything kind of leads up to the hero here, but he's, kind of being consumed by the masses he's slaughtering. This is a slightly more twisted, maybe a bit more dynamic pose that doesn't have anywhere near the kind of fundamentals, obviously, of a Frank Frazetta, but that's okay. And because it's Platt, it has to be all the detail in the world, and it's got to be super gory too, and I'm on board. And this sequence is the one that's going to be inked by Joe Weems. I think Joe Weems is definitely the guy you want on this particular sequence. Him or Bat, like one of those Top Cow guys. They're going to give this a whole different look than Rob Liefeld has ever had in one of his books. So we don't really need to read all this. It's fairly evident what's happening as he hacks his way down the halls here. I do like the motion as he slices one way and then slices the next in the next panel. So you get the feeling he's just like baseball bat swinging that axe back and forth as he moves down the halls. And eventually he does come across Magnar. And yeah, check out the rendering in this shot here. Hey, that looks fucking dope. It does kind of call back to that Top Cow look with kind of a hyper focus on rendering. That looks really awesome. So Bram makes it to the throne room. And naturally, Magnar isn't particularly put out by seeing this drug-crazed barbarian in front of him. He says, so it is you then, Outlander, who storms the fortress sinister. Thus it shall be your meager brains, my goblin devils, guzzle from the polished chalice of your skull in their appalling revels underground this night. I get the feeling that because Alan Moore was referencing an Arthur Conan Doyle character directly, he tried to capture some of the flair of those Arthur Conan Doyle stories. I don't think I've read a Conan story. I imagine that might be a little bit close. So Magnar calls upon his servant Bartolmew to summon his kobold hordes against this peasant oaf. Bring me his flayed and folded skin. And so we see Bartolmew, the kobold here, who has to admit, sorry, I can't really do that. See, the problem is that I made a deal with the barbarian oaf. He's going to help me and my buddies kind of get free of you. So you're kind of on your own on this one. And Magnar kind of loses. He's like, what? Impudent troglodyte, how dare you disobey me? "You are binded to my will, it says so in my magic grimoire." And Bartlemy responds by going, "Oh, right, yeah, the grimoire, yeah. I actually kind of took the liberty of rewriting our contract just a little bit, so I hope that's not too much of an inconvenience." And Magnar goes, "By the great serpent," as he turns in his chair finally to look like directly at Bram the Berserk, who is bearing down on him and splits his chair in two with his axe, pretty presumably splitting Magnar himself as well. That's kind of an awesome sequence. Big ol' schlock sound effect. That's a good one. I like that. So, having defeated Magnar, now he's going to take Magnar's grimoire, which is the source of Magnar's power. And we got another narration saying, "And thus was Bram the Outlander made Bram the King. He stepped towards the lectern, marveling at the splendor there displayed. The images upon it seemed to move and speak with him. Its worn and burnished edges glowed with destiny. He reached towards it with one scarred and painted hand, and the dark ages held their breath." Are we transitioning again? We might be. Not so much with the dialogue, but with the visual of the scarred and painted hand. So now we've got Shaft reacting to the murder of Riptide. And, naturally he's kind of beside himself here. Badrock and Vogue are in the background. They've already, of course, seen everything, so they're not quite so worked up at the moment. At that point, Sentinel walks by, and he gets called in, and he's like, what happened? This is important information for later. Shaft notes that Sentinel was on guard duty last night. He's like, "Did you see anything?" He's like, "Well, I saw Nightstrike go up in the elevator at about 12:30. That was about it." Vogue still wants to keep this in-house. She wants to keep it between superheroes. Shaft, of course, team leader. And he takes point. He's like, "Nope, we can't do that. We've got to tell the authorities." He says, "All I can do is call the one cop I know with superhero sympathies." And then we get the close-up as we get ready for the transition, saying, "It's a fairy tale gone wrong. The princess is dead. The knight is under suspicion. And we've got nobody left to turn to except the dragon." There's a setup if I've ever heard one. Not a bad page design here. I don't know if this is an Alan Moore design or if this is Rob. I could maybe see it being Rob. And if it is, it's not bad. It even looks like he's managed to figure out the planes for where everybody should be standing for this one panel. That's something he usually can't do, even today. A lot of the time when you see multiple people in the same panel, they tend to get cut off at the knees in a Rob Liefeld drawing. And the reason isn't so that he doesn't have to draw the feet, it's so that he doesn't have to draw the feet standing in the wrong position. So with the dragons, oh, wait a minute. Okay, that should have been the transition, but I guess it's not exactly necessary to, go directly into contacting Dragon. Still, it just feels like a slight bit of a fumble there. Instead, we're going to cut to another flashback. This is 1943, and this is Batlin Baron and his Roaring Roughnecks, so this is very clearly a Nick Fury pastiche. And this one's going to be drawn by Keith Giffen, inked by Bill Ray. And I would think doing a Nick Fury pastiche that this would be Kirby-type art, because I've seen Keith Giffen do a Kirby-style piece before, and it honestly looked pretty good. It was a pretty good homage. But no, he seems to be trying to channel Harvey Kurtzman a little bit from his 50s war stories, and doesn't get particularly close, I don't think. There's that cartoonishness to it, but it doesn't have the fluidity of a Kurtzman. Like, everybody looks pretty stiff, which is odd, because, Keith Giffen's a guy who, if he just sits down and studies a style for a bit, he can totally replicate it from what I've seen. So, I don't know, maybe he's going for something a little bit differently, but those would be the two obvious options, either Kirby or Kurtzman. Yeah, I think he should have gone Kirby on this one. Anyway, in this one, Batlin Baron and the Roughnecks, they're in the middle of World War II, and Baron here says, "Okay, you gold brick and dog faces, listen up. We're throwing everything we got against Rommel's Africa Corps. Rommel's got the Iron Cross helping him, but we've got the Stormbirds, the Super Patriot, and even Agent America." That's kind of a funny one, because this, of course, is right at the beginning of Awesome Entertainment. So this is in that brief window where Rob has stopped doing the Captain America comics for the Heroes Reborn series over at Marvel, and he's started in negotiations with Joe Simon about licensing Fighting American, but the price Joe Simon wants for the licensing fee is too high, so Rob is trying to get around that with Agent America. There's a little bit of added interest in here in that by the time he was able to secure the rights to Fighting American, it wouldn't have fit in this story because Fighting American fights communists, not Nazis. He's a 50s patriotic superhero. So interesting the timing on this whole thing. While they're trying to move out, one of the Roughnecks reminds Baron about the Phantom Aviator. who's caught some shrapnel. I guess he's kind of a regular in this version of 50s war comics. But they can't take him with them because he's too injured to move, so they got to leave him behind and hope for the best. Meanwhile, some rookie's going to check in with the Phantom Aviator, and the Aviator knows his time is up. And what he's going to do is he's going to hand off the thing that's been keeping him alive and turning him into a legend, which is this book. The private tries to convince him to, he's got to try and move. And he's like, there's no time. You can hear the artillery incoming. You got to get running now. And then before they can say anything more, the artillery goes off here. Oh, and then, we're just transitioning. We're flipping the page. There's no transition. That's an odd one because that sequence did interrupt the transition. It's interesting. At some point, we'll go over the Killing Joke. And that one is very deliberate when it comes to the page transitions. I'm not trying to rip on Alan Moore here or anything. It's just a little odd seeing it done kind of clumsily here. Okay, so now we're checking back in with the Dragon, and Dragon is having a sit down with Youngblood. He says, you guys were right to call me. Situation is delicate. It could blow up in our faces at any moment. You got a superhero victim, a suspected superhero perp, and superhero witnesses. Our legal system has never dealt with anything like this before, and between you and me, they're not anxious to start. And then he informs them that the authorities are willing to let the superhero community handle this, provided the law is fully represented. So he's responsible for some of that, but if this goes to trial, they'll need a judge, a prosecution, a defense, and he figures they'll probably need a special courtroom. And then he has to go off to check in with the rest of the cops who are cordoning off the scene. After he leaves, Youngblood, they kind of confer amongst each other. They're like, I don't even know where to get a fucking courtroom, buddy. But Die Hard has a couple of ideas, so he's going to check in with a couple of old allies. So he says, let me contact them. They'll have more perspective on this business. We're too close. We can't see the wood for the trees. That's a pretty rough one there, but sure, why not? There we go. Now we're in the woods. Okay, so we got another flashback coming. We've been a few flashbacks in so far, and I think at this point we're probably starting to get the idea that this MacGuffin, the central thing is the focus of the story, but there's still nothing linking it. I think you really do kind of have to wait until issue 2 to get the idea of what the book is. So this one is going to be The Adventures of Xantar, White God of the Congo, which is very clearly a pastiche on Tarzan. You just rearrange the 2 syllables, and he does later call out the racism in the title of White God of the Congo. That apparently is directly referencing the definition of Tarzan in the made-up primate language from the old Tarzan stories by Edgar Rice Burroughs, in which tar meant white and Zan meant skin. And this is kind of a riff on the colonial racism that was inherent in those Tarzan stories. So we get stuff like, the superstitious tribesmen were no match for Xantar's keen intelligence bestowed on him by centuries of noble Anglo-Saxon breeding, which is like a direct nod to the old Tarzan stories. I think the only problem here is I don't know how many people reading this in 1997 have read the original Tarzan stories. It's very obviously Alan Moore doing a bit, but still. So he just seems to be messing with these tribesmen that he often messes with. So they've got this idol that they usually worship, and the idol is the skeleton of an explorer perched up on a rock clutching a book. That explorer skeleton is actually going to come back, too. And he's just here to steal the book and run away back into the jungle. This is the one that's going to be done by Adam Polina with Jonathan Sabal. Looks all right. Doesn't nearly look as in-depth as those original pencils I saw back in 1990, whatever the fuck it was. Oh, and the deal with Xantar is that instead of being raised by apes, he was raised by lions. Which is, equally silly. Why not? And as he swings away, giving the deep, full-throated roar of the white lions that raised him, the natives all throw their spears after him. Their plumed spears whistling about his ears, he vanished in the jungle shadows, clasping to his pounding breast the prize that he had taken. Xantar growled with satisfaction. All was well as sunset neared. The forest came alive. Somewhere near, powerful beasts were stirring. Okay, now that's a proper transition. As we cut to Supreme. So that's the first person that Die Hard came to speak to regarding finding a proper venue for this trial that's going to happen. So he offers up his Citadel Supreme, and the Suprematons can convert his stadium area, and I suppose act as bailiffs in the actual trial. They've also been able to secure some legal aid in this. So for the judge, they found Catherine McKinnon, who once helped the Allies back in the 60s. For prosecution, they're Shona Shane, who used to sometimes assist Professor Knight as Lady Day before she retired. And for defense, we've got Mr. Toby Tiller, who apparently is 18 years old. And Shaft is like, no offense, isn't he a little young? Toby's like, I'm 19, Mr. Terrell. I'm just not very tall, especially not when I'm standing next to Supreme. And apparently he is the fisherman's sidekick, Skipper. But he has qualified in law. And they're like, well, okay, that's good enough, I suppose. And we're going to get a couple of fish puns here. He's like, how do you plan to handle Night Saber's defense? And he goes, I'm an angler, Mr. Terrell. Because, the guy he's a sidekick to is the fisherman. Assuming he's innocent, I plan to land the right fish and throw Night Saber back. Consequently, I'm going to need access to video footage of Youngblood's recent activities. Sentinel at this point pipes up, says, we don't have monitors here in Youngblood HQ or in the field. And Toby here says, that's okay. I have done my homework. So from what I understand, Diehard is largely synthetic. And his eyes store visual memory in disk form. So I'm going to need those as evidence, if you don't mind. So Diehard has to take off his mask. He just asks everybody to turn around. Everything looks reasonably fine. It's a jumble, but, that's to be expected, I think. Always interesting to see Liefeld doing Supreme, particularly during the Alan Moore era when Supreme has a very definite kind of feel from the original Rob Liefeld concept, but Rob Liefeld insists on continuing to draw him like the original concept. So everybody turns around. Sentinel asks him, this video disc thing is news to us too. How much data do you have stored? And Diehard says it goes back about 6 months. That might come up as relevant. So pops out the disc, hands it over, just asks, I hope I can rely on you to keep any personal details of mine to yourself. And he says, of course, it's confidential, all that kind of stuff. So we're not going to find out what him and Vogue have been getting up to in their off hours. And Toby and Diehard and Supreme all walk out, leaving Shaft and Sentinel to watch them go and just kind of go, this is fucked up. They're a little weirded out by the mention of all these old-timer superheroes that are going to have to come in, obviously, and either sit in the gallery, or some of them are going to have to act as witnesses, or maybe as a jury. I don't know. It seems like the entire superhero community is going to descend on Supreme Citadel. And pretty good figures for Rob on this one. I will say this Sentinel face here doesn't look remotely like anything Rob Liefeld would draw. Shaft here, yes. He's looking straight at us. That makes sense. Sentinel has a little bit of an incline to his chin, and I don't believe Rob can draw that. I think he looked at something for that. And of course, we've got another transition. So Shaft says, me and you have headed our respected halves of Youngblood all these years, and suddenly it feels like we're beneath a shadow. It feels like the sun is setting on everything we've built. Again, it just feels like you're trying a little bit too hard. So now we're going back to 530 AD. So this would be probably the next era after Bram the Berserk, where we check in with the Winter Knight, who seems to be the first character who's not directly referencing a previous literary figure. It's more just kind of a trope that he's going after, the Arthurian Knight. This sequence is going to be drawn by Dan Jurgens and inked by Al Gordon, I think it was. That's the one. I believe Al Gordon was the guy who actually inked Rob Liefeld on a poster he put up for Megaton Comics, back when Rob was first starting out. So that might be a connection that he's had for a while, unless I'm thinking of Jerry Ordway. I don't think it was Jerry Ordway. I always get those two guys confused. Let me know if I screwed that one up. But anyway, this is at the end of Arthur's time when Camelot is falling. So Merlin entreats the Winter Knight to take the book. This is the thing that has let Arthur, grow into legend. He says, take it now and flee, for there are many who would take it from thee. And as the Winter Knight flees through the woods, he is beset upon by all manner of orcs or trolls or fucking something. Ogres, it looks like. Sure. And then he's attacked by the dragon Phalanx. And the Winter Knight responds by poking him with his sword. Like, that is a straight up poke. Just kind of goes, boop. And next time we see Phalanx, his head has been severed. So that was one hell of a poke. I've never been much of a fan of Dan Jurgens. Basically all based off of Superman 75, which I still think he did not a very good job of it all. The ink still looks nice, though. They're nice and crisp. And everything is reasonably clear, except for why exactly Phalanx's head fell off, but I guess we just kind of got to go with that. And having lethally poked Phalanx, the Winter Knight says, now ride onward, Blizzard, for our world is brought to ruin at our heels. Our shining age of heroes nears its ending, and the day of our celestial reckoning is finally at hand. There we go. 1997, now we're at the Citadel Supreme. I don't think Rob drew that. I think that one might be like Joe Bennett or something. Looks pretty good. It adheres to the perspective fairly well, and there's a reasonable amount of detail in there. It's not, Richard Bennett kind of shit. That would be mind-bending. But it's definitely good enough for the size of the panel, which is what it has to be. So everybody's getting ready for the trial. The judge is going to have a quick chat with the lawyers before they start. She says, I'd just like to make it clear that there will be no favorites played here. To me, this is just another case. And then she gets the Suprematons to escort her to her chambers. And she walks off, and everybody else is just kind of left marveling at Supreme's citadel here, just how much crazy shit is in there. You know, he's got himself a mermaid in a bubble here. And apparently there's a big giant stuffed gorilla somewhere. Maybe that's it. We just see a little bit of fuzz in the background. And they're on their way to the stadium. There's like, that stadium looks pretty huge too. Toby's like, it has to be. Do you have any idea how many witnesses I had to call for this thing? Sentinel's like, what do you mean? I thought this trial was mainly an inter-Youngblood affair. And Shaft works his way in. Apparently that's not going to be the case. Oh, but Rob kind of fucked it up. As we get our shot of Nightsaber in his Battlestone manacles. And we know the shot this should be. This should be some George Perez type shot where we've got, yeah, sure, Nightsaber in the foreground here, sure. And then we've got rows of masked heroes behind them. But Rob couldn't exactly manage that, so we just get silhouettes and then we get close-ups on some people. And it's like, oh, I guess there's a lot of masked people in here. Maybe they're all masked people. We'll never know. And that's going to be the end of Chapter 1 of 3. This is going to be the series going forward. It's all going to be a trial for superheroes. Rob naturally didn't want that. You know, originally when he spoke to Alan Moore, he's like, I want an event, but he was thinking something along the lines of the coming of Galactus, where, you know, a big threat shows up and all of the awesome entertainment universe, I suppose, has to band together to fight him, probably. That would have been the kind of thing Rob would have wanted. But no, Alan Moore was into courtroom dramas at the time, I guess. So this is what he came up with, and he wasn't interested in coming up with anything else. So Rob's like, fuck, all right, I'll take that. Interesting note in that this character wasn't originally supposed to be Nightsaber, the one at the heart of the trial. This was supposed to be Chapel, which would have made a lot more sense, really. You know, Chapel is a cold-blooded mercenary, right? And I mean, hell, he was the devil one time. But the problem, of course, is that the character of Chapel was like the least possible one to use for any kind of awesome entertainment event at this time, because he was the one who was most entangled in like continuity red tape, since Chapel was the one who killed Spawn. So instead we got to go with the Australian guy, which honestly I don't think is the worst thing, because Nightsaber has never been a character up until now. Well, you know, why don't we make him one now? And then we're going to get a missive from, well, not Rob Liefeld in this case. This is going to be from the publisher, Jeff Loeb. And this one boils down to, hey, guys, awesome entertainment is going to be incredible. We got this book coming up. We got that book coming up. And he says, after Judgment Day, we'll be putting out 4 quality titles a month. We plan to stay lean and mean and hit our ship dates. Keep that one in mind. And we also end with, we're working on toys. The Prophet action figure is, well, awesome. Movies, video games, look out for Youngblood. I'm still looking. And on and on and on. So, yeah, just keep that one in mind, because we might revisit some of those topics. So now we're moving on to Judgment Day number 2. Like, that would have made for a pretty good cover for the first one, you know? That's a bit of a shame. And I actually recognize, like, you know, Supreme and Prophet. I don't think Prophet shows up in this entire series, but who cares? There's Mighty Man back there. There's the original Super Patriot. Wonder Woman? I don't know if that's Glory. Doesn't seem like it. There's a couple of characters that showed up in the latter days of Supreme. So yeah, that one would have been a fair bit better. Oh well. I should also mention the Rob Liefeld version of the cover for this issue, mostly because I think it's kind of hilarious. The main figure for Nightsaber is fine. Nothing wrong with it really whatsoever. I would like to draw your attention, though, to the heads of Shaft and Die Hard. So I think this is kind of in the early days of Rob trying to do that montage type cover where you've got the main figure and then you've got a couple of heads in the background. And he doesn't quite have it down just yet. If you'll note, Die Hard is meant to be in front of Shaft. Shaft's body is behind Die Hard's shoulder, and yet Shaft's chin is in front of Die Hard's head. And the only conclusion I can draw from that is that they are snuggling awful hard. That's it. We can get started on the issue now. So we're going to start with the prosecution's opening statement. So we have heard that Michael Toombs, also known as Nightsaber, returned to Youngblood HQ on the night of August 30th. It was his birthday, and he'd been drinking heavily. We've heard from Marcus Langston, also known as Sentinel, who was manning the reception desk that night. He states that Toombs came in at 12:30 a.m. and took the elevator to the upper floors. According to Mr. Toombs' own testimony, he decided to visit Miss Creel's quarters for conversation, his words, and finding her absent, collapsed on her bed. He states that Toombs claims to remember nothing beyond this point. However, since the coroner has placed the time of Miss Creel's death at 1:30, it's possible to reconstruct what must have followed. Leanna Creel had popped out maybe for a walk. Returning around 1:15, as confirmed by Mr. Langston on the desk, she went to her room. She must have discovered Mr. Toombs drunk and presumably woke him. As to what happens next, well, one possibility is that Toombs made drunken sexual advances toward Miss Creel and that she rejected him. Alternatively, Toombs found himself too inebriated to perform. Either way, it made him very angry. A fight broke out. At some point, Miss Creel used her moisture manipulation abilities to send a small wave at Mr. Toombs. The soaked carpet in the apartment confirms this. We believe Toombs then used his electrostaff to stun Ms. Creel. This may be what fused the electrics in the apartment. With Miss Creel stunned, I suggest that Toombs dragged her to the living room, where he bludgeoned her to death in a blind rage. After which, returning to the bedroom, he passed out again and slept like a baby. That, Your Honor, outlines the case for the prosecution. So, okay, nice, tidy summation. Also, if we were paying attention in the first issue, we'd know that something doesn't add up here, because when Night Saber visited Riptide's apartment, the carpet was already wet. So this is kind of our first hint that, maybe Night Saber actually didn't do it. Intriguing. So the judge thanks the prosecutor for giving her opening statement way down there, because apparently she's got to sit on like a giant stone monolith of some kind. Maybe that's just what was available in the Citadel Supreme. So because of the high feelings, because of all the media and superhero type buzz that's going around this case, the judge is going to suggest a short recess, and then they're going to get to the case for the defense. And Dragon shuffles Night Saber outside for a bit. And then we're going to get a bit with Badrock and Savage Dragon having a bit of a conversation. It's interesting that Savage Dragon is in this so much, considering all the lawsuits being levied at Rob at this time. I'm guessing him and Eric Larson are still getting along okay, and that, he's given Rob permission to use him. I mean, I'm sure his copyright is in the indicia here. I'll have to assume it is, because I sure as shit can't read that. When it comes to the lawsuits, it seems it's mostly down to Todd McFarlane. He was the one who kind of chaired the meeting to get Rob kicked out of Image Comics. He turned it into a bit of a crusade, and now he's seems to be trying to strip him of everything he can. Not exactly sure why Todd had such a bee in his bonnet at this time. Rob doesn't seem to know why either, or at least that's what he said publicly. I mean, these days it doesn't matter. They've kind of kissed and made up, and they're buddies again in public. But man, there were a few years there where it seems like it was really weird between those two guys. Anyway, back to this. Badrock and Dragon are talking about just how weird this whole procedure is. And Dragon directs Badrock's attention to this guy, Major Baron, who works for an organization called The Veil. He says he flashed me clearance I didn't even know existed. Walked into the crime scene, didn't even examine the body or any of the evidence, just threw a bunch of I-Ching coins down on the floor and did a quick tarot reading, and then he took off again. And they're also going to go on a little bit about just how crazy the media has been around this whole event. We're not going to see very much evidence of that at all. There's the odd person talking about it here and there. It does seem to be something Alan Moore at least wants to mention, but it doesn't seem to be a central part of the story, which is a little bit important for just how Liefeld is going to present this whole event later on. At that point, the recess is over, so everybody starts shuffling back into the courtroom, where the judge entreats Toby to start putting up the case for the defense. So Toby's going to start out by calling Glory's ass to the stand. And some dude in a domino mask goes, "Good God, look how flat that ass is." I guess it's relevant. I mean, if we think back to Battlestone #1, Glory's ass was kind of a key cast member in that book too. So he calls her up to the stand, and he's going to open by saying, "So, Your Celestial Highness, am I correct in assuming that you belong to a race of gods that predates humanity?" And she's like, "Well, I'm a demigod. My mother and her immediate family actually predate the creation of the physical universe itself." And then the prosecutor cuts in with, "What the fuck does this have to do with anything?" At which point Toby explains, "No, I'm building a larger narrative here. I need to kind of lay some groundwork from it. I just kind of need you to bear with me." Which the judge allows. So that kind of sets the precedent for Toby to go on, which he's going to do for this entire issue. So we're going to get an early tale from Glory here. This one's going to be illustrated by Chris Sprouse. Who's doing the inking on that? Al Gordon. Good stuff. I think at this time Chris Sprouse is still drawing Supreme. So, I mean, he is an awesome entertainment asset, I suppose. So Glory tells the tale of one day when she was out with her mother and they sailed across to the splendid palace of the Earth Gods. And when they arrived, they found that somebody was waiting for them. It is always a little bit odd when we get these flashbacks because, the bridging mechanism is always this kind of jagged, not very well realized Rob Liefeld art where, there's no fundamentals whatsoever. And then pretty much everybody he's bringing in is a much better artist than him. I mean, I'm sure at least some part of him recognizes that they're much more skilled at the actual art of making comics. Still, it is just a little strange. So, anyway, it turns out the visitor is going to be Mercury, which is actually important considering that this is Alan Moore writing this thing. For anybody who doesn't know, Alan Moore considers himself a wizard. He does magical things. One of those magical things is that he communes with otherworldly beings. And at one point, he claims to have communed with the god Mercury. So he's worked Mercury into a couple of his stories, most notably this one here and Promethea, which is interesting in context because the story in which he's going to put Mercury is the Glory story, and of course, the story that he developed for the Glory book would eventually get developed into Promethea. Anyway, Alan Moore's version of Mercury is a very interesting character. I kind of wish he'd feature him a little bit more often, to be honest. Most people know Mercury as the messenger of the gods. He's actually the god of a lot of things, including boundaries, commerce, luck, thieves, travelers, and trickery, and most notably in this case, language. So Alan Moore's version of Mercury is a trickster god who often behaves mischievously for the benefit of his own amusement. In this case, he's brought a gift for Demeter, or for Glory, for everybody really, and it is the concept of a story, represented here by this big old book. This is the same book we've been seeing over and over again in flashbacks throughout the entire series so far. So this book doesn't just contain a story, it contains every story, and it can be altered. So in the context of Judgment Day, that's kind of the most important function of the book. Like, yes, you can use it for information, but if you just kind of read it as it is, then you're just kind of divining the future and you have to go along with it no matter what. However, if you start writing over some shit, then you actually end up changing reality. Nobody really knows that just yet. It's just like, be careful of Mercury because the gifts he gives are usually pretty messed up. So having put Demeter and her guards on their back foot, he hands off the book to Glory, says, take the book, place it in your just-made world of matter. So this was right at the beginning of the physical universe. Then when life arises there, it shall have meaning. It shall have stories and villains and monsters and heroes. The book is the model that makes such things possible. Demeter says, is it not dangerous? And Mercury says, of course it's dangerous. It's made of language, as am I. Like me, it's dangerous and bright. Like me, it's funny, clever, and quite irresistible. And then he leaves by saying, farewell, Demeter, farewell, Glory, I'll see you later, and takes off laughing, which he does an awful lot of. And, Chris Sprouse's art, it's exactly how it always is. It's very well realized. It's very slick and clear and pleasing to the eye. Not super dynamic generally, like he can do dynamicism. It's, it's not the thing he does best, I don't think. But it doesn't really matter because this isn't a particularly dynamic part of this story. So from that day, Demeter spends many afternoons reading the book, or maybe it's centuries, Glory can't quite remember. And finally, at the end of it, decides that they need to take the book down to the newly born world of matter. So this would have been on Earth at a time when the Earth is still forming. And it's all noxious gases and like tectonic plates shifting and constant calamity. So Demeter took the book and hid it in a cave, a place of power where its immortal pages could endure for eons. And she ends by saying, even then, I think she knew that this was not to be. She'd read the book. By then, she knew it was too late. We were already in the story, do you see? Each one of us, we were already written in the Mad God's book. So that's the end of Glory's statement. Toby asks her if she ever saw the book again, and Glory has to say, yes, I saw it on 2 further occasions. The first time was during the 40s. It somehow came into the possession of a colleague of mine named Storybook Smith. And at that point, the prosecution interrupts and says, okay, what the hell is going on? This has nothing to do with anything. Toby insists, nope, this is vital to my case. If the witness could please just finish her testimony. The judge says, okay, fine, but you better get to the point quick. And Toby goes, okay, cool. When was the second time you saw that book? And Glory says it was on the videotape of Leanna Creel's room that you showed me. So, it does tie together. Prosecution's going to try and cast doubt. She's like, what is this? My learned friend suggesting that he has evidence of a mythological book in the apartment of the deceased. And Toby's like, that is exactly what I'm saying. This still photograph was taken by in-body camera of the android Die Hard weeks ago. It shows the book in Miss Creel's room. And the judge is like, well, that's fascinating. I take it you want to call another witness? And he's like, you're damn right I do. Courtesy of the Time Tower, I'd like to call Giganthro. And this page, I mean, it's boring. From Rob's perspective, he very obviously didn't want to draw it. There's not a whole lot of effort in this thing. So from here, we're going to get the testimony of Giganthro, who is an early hominid Gigantropithecus. And he's accompanied by Zalazarn from the 25th century, leader of Trans-Time Super Team, the League of Infinity, of which Giganthro is a member. So that's the equivalent of the Legion of Superheroes that Alan Moore set up back in the pages of Supreme. Giganthro's tale harkens back to the Miocene period 10 million years ago, when he was Giganthro, son of the dawn. And Giganthro was kind of just another caveman, except that he had unusually high intelligence, as did a lot of the other creatures in his area, and that could be attributed to the proximity of a strange mountain cave. Says when he grown old enough to investigate, Giganthro found the cave guarded by another incredible product of whatever life-changing power was concealed within. Says this impossible throwback to the age of giant saurians possessed a semi-human head and brain. We later christened him Dino Man. He does look like he should also have a mustache to me. Maybe I'm just getting leader vibes there, I'm not for sure. So, Dino Man was way too strong for Giganthro. Giganthro had to make his way past him through cunning. So we get him flipping all around the place here. This is pretty good stuff. This one's going to be penciled by Steve Scrose. And I think this is one of the best things I've seen Steve Scrose draw, to be honest. Most of the time when I see Steve Scrose drawing, it gets way too jumbled. He likes to put a lot of detail on the page, but doesn't necessarily separate everything all that well a lot of the time. But everything's pretty well separated here. Everything looks very clear. He's doing a good job of using the shadows to kind of make Giganthro here stand out. So Giganthro continues his testimony where he went into the inner sanctum of the cave, where the source of power was, and of course it was Mercury's book. At that point, Dino Man came back. Giganthro only had a second to act, but he knew what he had to do, and threw the book down a crevice. Dino Man went diving after it, fell deep into the crevice, and it lay buried in the earth for millions of years. I suppose until the time of Bram the Berserk, really. We get the description here. It was as if he knew its power and could not bear to lose it. Though he'd eventually return, Giganthro never saw the book again. Soon after that, my newly formed League of Infinity approached Giganthro, asking him to join us. Oddly, we'd first heard of him through the historical records of my testimony in this very trial. These words I'm speaking now. So that's a fun little time travel thing. It's always good when you can fit that in. As we cut back to the courtroom where Zalazarn is busy trying to fit her forearm into her ass. Because it looks like Rob originally started to draw this in profile, then decided that didn't work quite as well. So drew the other cheek, didn't redraw the arm because Rob doesn't ever do that. So it's just stuck between the cheeks. Prosecutor butts in and says, if this witness is from the future, why doesn't she just tell us the outcome of the trial and save us all some time? And Zalazarn says, well, as I remember, it ends with a fellow Youngblood member convicted on Miss Creel's murder. And Toby's like, that's enough of this witness. Thank you very much for your testimony. And she's quickly shuttled off. And we're going to cut to Troll of all people. You got to get Troll in this. Troll is like Rob Liefeld's favorite creation, at least in the mid-90s. Troll's like, shit, well, that doesn't look too good. She pretty much just said that he's guilty. And, he's having a little bit of a conversation with Supreme, I don't remember his name. Is it Radar? Something like that. But then his conversation gets cut short because Troll is the next one called up to the stand. Troll's like, listen, what is this? I wasn't even at Youngblood HQ the night it happened. Don't go thinking you can pin everything on the short guy. And Toby responds by saying, no one's trying to pin anything on you, Mr. Troll. Although, strictly speaking, you're not any sort of guy, are you? And I was like, oh, what does that mean? So now's when we're going to get it revealed to us that Troll is an actual troll. He's one of those kobolds from the Bram the Berserk storyline, the blue furry guys. In fact, he's the specific one who was working for Magnar and then betrayed him. Back then he went by Bartolmew. These days he's Bartholomew J. Troll, right? And Toby's going to get him to prove this by asking him to take off his goggles. And he does, to reveal that he has no pupils, shocking the entire courtroom. And we do a quick cut to a couple of shocked Extreme Studios mainstays who also don't have any pupils. That's a fun little gag. But now we got to get back to Bram the Berserk. And Troll's going to give his testimony. He says about how his race had lived in caverns below the earth for centuries. In 425, we were trapped in slavery by a warlock named Magnar Tufelson, and he'd heard of a magic book that had been lost below earth for millions of years and forced us to find and retrieve it for him. He used its power to rule until he was betrayed in 436 to a marauding Northland berserker called Bram. And then we get a quick A-side being like, I forget who it was that betrayed Tufelson. Some low-down treacherous vermin with no morals whatsoever, I suspect. But then follows that up with, but inheriting the book, Bram ruled wisely for many years, so whoever betrayed Tufelson's probably a hero, right? At least in his own story. So now we get another flashback. This one is actually going to be penciled by Stephen Platt again. So he managed like 8 whole pages over the course of 2 months. That's impressive for Stephen Platt. So this particular story comes at the end of Bram the Berserk's life, where he knows the end is coming. How does he know? Because he's had a certain book with him for decades. So he's decided to go out like a proper berserker by hunting the Frostworm. So once he and his faithful companion Bartholomew near the monster's lair, Bram is going to hand off the book to Bartholomew. He says, "Though ye be low and treacherous, you are my only friend. Take the book, Bartholomew. Take it and ride far from this fateful place." Bartholomew's like, "You can't be serious." He's like, "No, I'm really serious. I took a whole lot of drugs before I came here, and they're really starting to kick in, so you gotta run." At which point, the Frostworm comes through, and Bram starts shouting, as Bram is apparently wont to do, yelling, vengeance and brains for Wotan!" And Bartholomew takes his cue and gets the fuck out of there with the book. And he starts giving a little bit more testimony, saying, "You see, that book has the whole story of life in it, and I discovered that you could rewrite it in your own favor. That's how Tuvelson got deposed. He was written out. Anyway, I profited in small ways from the book until a couple of centuries later. That's when I lost the book to a scheming, dishonest charlatan named Merlin. Lost it at cards, since you asked. And of course, Merlin set up some pretty boy named Arthur to become the new king of Britain. And, the kingdom had a brief golden age, then it died out. And Merlin handed off the book to his champion, Sir Gilles de Vere, also known as the Winter Knight. And Troll's part of the story isn't quite done. He's like, since I was the one who originally retrieved the book, I felt I had some kind of claim on it. So I trailed the Winter Knight from Camelot and bravely confronted him about it face to face, man to man, as he approaches him while the Winter Knight is sleeping. These pages fucking rock. This is at an interesting time for Stephen Platt, where he still retains a fair amount of the old intensity from his Prophet days, but he's still learning about fundamentals, so he's actually able to apply those to the crazy intense style he had before, as opposed to washing away the old intense style with pure fundamentals, which is kind of what he does these days. So trying to steal the book from the Winter Knight while the Winter Knight's asleep, he's not quite quiet enough. Winter Knight wakes up. Bartholomew goes, "Oh shit," and tries to run away, tries to run into a waterfall, which isn't too smart because the Winter Knight's name is to be taken literally, as he thrusts his sword into the lake, freezing it, and freezing Bartholomew in the waterfall for the next few centuries. And that's going to be the end of Troll's testimony, so he puts his goggles back on, heads back to his seat, and Toby continues. He ended by saying how he heard the Winter Knight had left the book to his order, who eventually became the Knights Templar. And after he leaves, Toby continues saying, "Utilizing the League of Infinity's records, I've established that when the Knights Templar were persecuted in the 14th century, some took to piracy. Amongst these was a notorious buccaneer named Captain Compass, the Black Corsair. Compass, as part of a Templar expedition, brought the book to America many years before Columbus set foot here. When Compass died, the book passed into the hands of a Salem witch cult." So that's some fun stuff. The judge is going to stop him there, though, and go, "Okay, you know what, I was kind of willing to go along with you for a little bit, but we've just got a little bit of circumstantial evidence stating that Miss Creel owned the book. What does all this have to do with that?" And Toby replies saying, "Your Honor, I have stills of Miss Creel's apartment several months ago. The book is not present. In stills from some weeks ago, as we've seen, Miss Creel owns the book. It was not at the crime scene, and I intend to prove that its theft was the motive for Miss Creel's murder. To that end, I should like to call my next witness, Miss Laurie Sanders, otherwise known as the Maximage." So I feel another flashback coming on. The inking on this page is extremely ugly. This kind of feels a little bit like those Gil Kane sequences earlier. I don't know if Jonathan Sabal's the one credited with inking all of Rob Liefeld's stuff. There's that same special thanks to Dave Gibbons, Merritt Michaels, and Rick Veach. So maybe somebody's inking in there. I don't know what the deal is. But those lines are still ugly. So Toby's going to swear in the Maximage, and he's going to explain to the court that she's a sorceress, believed to be the Maximage or Master Magus of our era. So kind of a Sorcerer Supreme thing. And what he wants her to do is to summon the consciousness of one of the previous Master Maguses, which is something she's never even tried before, but she's like, okay, I can give it a shot. And he wants her to recall the consciousness of Night Eagle, and he was the shaman character who was in the Kid Thunder story earlier on. Toby needs to ask him, okay, I need you to tell me everything you know about a magic book around your time. He's like, okay, I do know something about that. That passed into the ownership of a man named Deliverance Drew when he shot down a coven of Salem witches. So now we're going to get the story of Deliverance Drew, as drawn by Jim Starlin. That's an interesting pull. I do like Jim Starlin's stuff. I'll be honest, I like his earlier stuff a bit better. It's far less polished. Like, you know, he's like professional comic book artist guy at this point. I mean, he's also quite a good writer. He's probably a better writer than he's an artist. I don't know, his early stuff, it had a lot, I don't know, it just had some charm to it. You know, just his willingness to draw like anything, whether or not he could pull it off, and his tendency to go for big kind of splash page shots. It was some fun stuff. We looked at, I think it was Avengers Annual #2, which had one of Thanos' many capers. If you haven't seen that one, I'd recommend checking it out again. That was a fun book. But, I mean, Deliverance Drew is pretty much what you think. He runs rampant across the Northeast, clearing out everybody who he deems offensive to his god, and he does it through the power of the book. And because of the book, he's able to live for about 200 years, and of course, he's always victorious. So now we've got to put in a little backstory on Deliverance Drew, which may not seem relevant to the story, but it is. And in addition to being relevant to the current plot, this is also, I think, Alan Moore just kind of spreading some seeds that he can revisit later during his tenure at Awesome Entertainment. Because, yeah, like right now we're jumping all over the timeline, and, you know, we're just kind of referencing back to different eras, different kinds of stories, that sort of thing. But we're also saying all these different eras and stories take place in the Awesome Entertainment universe. So if in future Alan Moore wants to write a Solomon Kane story, he's got Deliverance Drew at the ready. If he wants to write a 50s cowboy story, he's got Kid Thunder and Nightshade and all of them. You know, we had Xantar, we had Bram the Berserk. There's going to be a few more that get added into this. And it's just kind of setting the precedent that, yeah, there are all sorts of fantastical heroes in this world, and Alan Moore can use them again in the future if he wants to. Or if he decides to branch off and do his own thing, there's a precedent here for anybody else who comes in where they can play in this sandbox as well. I mean, chances are they wouldn't, because whoever got hired would be hired by Rob Liefeld, and, like, he's not going to hire somebody who thinks bringing back, like, the Fisherman is cool. But those things are there now, and it's all part of the landscape that Alan Moore gets to play with going forward. So here we're going to make the connection between Deliverance Drew and Kid Thunder. So the deal is Deliverance Drew has a servant girl, a God-fearing Christian woman who he'd taken in, and Kid Thunder decided he was going to help her escape. I guess he probably didn't like the way Drew treated her, something like that. Only she's saying how she can't escape, and when he gets inside the house he sees why, because she's pregnant. So this 200-year-old Puritan has knocked up his servant girl. And he tries to tell her again, you got to get away from this guy. He's bad news. And she's like, I can't. That's not what's going to happen. My fate's already been written. He told me. It's written in the Lord's great book. And Kid Thunder makes a promise to make Deliverance Drew pay for what he did. So from there, I think we can surmise that he sought out the book and stole it, and then ended up holed up in the mountains waiting for Drew to find him. So now we're skipping ahead to when Drew does find him, and he somehow gets the drop on Kid Thunder, even though Kid Thunder was expecting him, and manages to put bullets through both of his shoulders, grievously wounding him. So Kid Thunder crawls towards the book, which is laying out, and Deliverance Drew is yelling after him, going, Do not think to touch the holy book that you purloined from me. It shall not save you. You have no plume, no ink. I doubt that you can even write. And Kid Thunder gets the book, says, maybe not, but I got my finger, and I got blood, and I can cross out. Drew runs up, but not in time. And crossing about apparently causes him to explode. That's a fun shot. And as he's dying, he yells, curse you and all your seed, curse them to hell. And that was the end of Deliverance Drew. Afterwards, Kid Thunder didn't want anything to do with the book. He didn't like how powerful it makes people. So he went back to find Brimstone and Night Eagle and asked them what they thought he should do, and they said, bury the book. And that's all Night Eagle knows. He never saw it again in life. And that's the end of the Maximage's testimony. So she's dismissed, but at the same time, she's like, geez, I didn't even know I could do that. I'm going to have to try that again sometime. So again, Alan Moore just kind of going here. If you guys want an idea for what to do with this character, I got one. It's just right in the comic here. Kind of like what he did with Spawn #8, really. That thing's just like a gold mine of ideas that Todd McFarlane's been constantly plundering over the last 30 years. Okay, so with that witness gone, we got another witness coming up, because this is the second book. This is basically what this entire issue is going to be about. So this time, the witness is going to be Daniel Blackie Conqueror, leader of the famous Conquerors of the Uncanny, which is a reference to which I'm pretty sure is a reference to Challengers of the Unknown, which is the comic book that Jack Kirby came up with for DC in the days just before he moved back to Marvel. And at that time, the editors at Marvel and DC didn't want anything to do with superheroes. They were seen as passé. So instead, he came up with this sci-fi idea. And then when he moved to Marvel, they kind of reworked that into the Fantastic Four. It was sort of a stealth launch for superheroes. So he's been called up not because he really has personal experience with the book, not very much anyway. It's more because his family has personal experience with the book. So time for another flashback. This one's going to be illustrated by Terry and Rachel Dodson. So this story is actually going to be about Blackie Conqueror's grandfather, Sir Edward Conqueror, which is another reference back to another Sir Arthur Conan Doyle character. This one is Professor George Edward Challenger. So the story of Sir Edward Conqueror is that he discovered Conqueror Island, which is a savage land kind of island, where it's all sorts of weird throwbacks. For some reason, you can hunt dinosaurs there if you want to. Again, just kind of adding stuff in there that if Alan Moore wants to, you can totally revisit. And this is sort of a British colonial version of Indiana Jones, where he goes to far-off places, and he's an archaeologist. So while he's exploring on Conqueror Island, he is able to find an old Indian burial ground where he found something that his notes refer to only as artifact number 137. And that, of course, is the book. And of course, going forward, he kept it with him always. He took it with him on his final expedition in 1905 when he was visiting Africa in search of his lost brother William, William's wife Suzanne, and their son Charles. So this other conqueror family had gone missing while on safari in the Congo. And they later learned that William and Suzanne had died of an illness and only the baby survived because for some reason a bunch of white tigers had decided to raise it as a cub. And that, of course, is Xantar. So he's the nephew of Sir Edward Conqueror. And it turns out that the explorer skeleton that Xantar stole the book from that was up on the pedestal, that was actually the skeleton of his uncle. That was where he died. Or where his body was placed, one or the other. And then years later in the 1920s, Xantar finally came to America, where in New York he met John Prophet, the famed Man of Marble. And after an initial skirmish between the two, Xantar gave the book to Prophet, and it passed out of the Conqueror family history. So this is Prophet here, and this seems a little bit interesting, because this actually seems a bit closer to what Alan Moore eventually would do with Tom Strong, where it's more of a Doc Savage kind of deal, as opposed to Supreme, who very clearly always was Silver Age Superman. So I guess I must have remembered that wrong or something. I think it's far less likely Liefeld remembers the proposal wrong. I think that's probably me. So that is going to be the last witness for the day. The judge is worn out. So court is adjourned until tomorrow, and everyone files out. And the superheroes are all just going to chat a little bit. We got the fisherman talking with his sidekick, saying, "Good going in there, Skip. Reel him in slow, like I taught you." Shona's talking with her partner. You know, it's all just kind of after the fact conversation stuff, as Shaft angrily does his soft shoe past them. That is like the most awkward looking attempt at drawing a walk I think I've seen. Get Shaft running past a couple of women, probably from either the Golden Age or the Silver Age, who are complaining about how revealing the modern female costumes are, and one of them's like, "I don't know, I've been thinking about kind of updating a little bit." And I guess this distracts Shaft quite a bit, because he does not notice whoever's standing right in front of him. Oh, it's Agent Graves. So I think in this universe, we're just ignoring the Extreme Sacrifice crossover altogether, which is just probably a smart move. Because if we're not, then Agent Graves is literally Satan. So probably just best to pretend that never happened. And Graves needs to talk to Shaft for a little bit. Shaft's like, "Sir, if it's about Night Saber, Mickey Toombs, I know you and he were close, but..." And Graves is like, "Toombs? Is that what he's calling himself?" That's kind of funny. No, his name isn't Toombs, it's Graves. He's my son. But that's not why I'm here. Just kind of completely bypassing it. We don't need to bring that up right now. But no, Graves is here about Youngblood. He's like, "All this is bringing the administration bad press at a time when they don't need it. I'm afraid they're pulling the plug. No more funding." And he says, "What are you saying, sir?" And he says, "I'm saying that as of noon today, Youngblood ceased to exist. I'm saying it's over." As he drops his duffel bag-sized stogie at Shaft's feet. Like, you know the shot he's going for here. It's a pretty difficult shot to pull off, particularly with something as small as a fucking stogie. But, you know, this is bungled pretty badly. I guess I appreciate the attempt to try to do something that's like kind of a dramatic splash page, and it just gets completely undercut. Oh, and then we're going to get another missive from Jeff Lowe. Remember how the last one was, "Hey, look out for us, we're coming, and we're going to be on time"? The theme on this one is going to be, "Hey guys, sorry, we fucked up." Which I got a bit of a laugh at. I mean, you know, like, I think Jeff Lowe kind of missed his calling a little bit by going into being a screenwriter. He should have been a fucking stand-up comedian. That is some quality setup and payoff. But no, apparently trying to wrangle all of the backup story artists when you don't really know a whole lot about how to run a company, it's a little bit difficult to do. And so, yeah, they just ended up falling behind. That's okay. So anyway, now we're moving on to Judgment Day number 3. This is Final Judgment. And hey, we actually get a bunch of Youngblood characters on the cover this time. That's kind of nice. We got Combat, we got Sentinel, we got Brahma, I think that's his name, Masada. And there's Battlestone. Look at him go. I think that's Kodiak from the New Men. I don't know who this woman is, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, and the credits are going to be a little bit different on this one. So for the bridging pieces, it's not just going to be Rob Liefeld doing the penciling anymore. It's also going to be Merritt Michaels and Cedric Nacone. Is that necessarily worse? Honestly, in this case, I don't know. I don't really think so. You know, Liefeld has had next to nothing in this that he would want to draw. So he's doing such a lackluster job. You know, like he's very obviously bored on all of these pages. He's not looking for ways to make them interesting. He's just trying to slog through them. And you can absolutely tell. And for the flashback sequences, we're actually not really going for the freelancers on this one, either because it's getting to be too difficult to wrangle them, or, you know, maybe it's starting to get a little bit too expensive. But it appears that Rob Liefeld is sticking mostly with Awesome Entertainment guys. Because we've got Jeff Johnson and Dan Panosian. I'm not sure who Jeff Johnson is. He's pretty good at this, though. We got Rick Veitch, who would be working on Supreme with Alan Moore. And we got Ian Churchill and Norm Rapmond. And Ian Churchill, of course, would be the guy who created Coven. All right, so now we're getting to the end here. We've mostly gotten through all the stuff that was just kind of expanding the Awesome universe and talking about how crazy this book is. So we're joining up with Youngblood the next day as they fly to the Citadel Supreme. And Shaft and Sentinel are going to have a chat as they fly in. And Sentinel keeps kind of muttering to himself about how this isn't right. Shaft is like, I know it's been crazy, and now Youngblood's been shut down. What are we going to do? The Sentinel's like, no, that's not what I meant. I meant this isn't right. This isn't the right ending for things. The story's supposed to work out differently. Well, yeah, I guess everybody feels kind of the same. Like, Vogue said she was going back to Russia. Badrock said he's discussing movie offers. But, I mean, if we've been paying attention at this point, we know what that means. That means that he has some kind of connection to the book. He also takes a second to cast some aspersions on Die Hard, saying, you notice how he's just hanging out with all of his old allies' buddies? And what the hell is up with him filming us all the time? I didn't even know he did that shit. And Shaft goes, yeah, I guess this case is just full of revelations. Revelations as in apocalypse. Revelations as in Judgment Day. So we're trying a little bit hard on that one, but that's okay, I guess. So I think these are some Merritt pages. The only thing that confused me, of course, is that these look like exactly like Liefeld heads. Well, pretty much anyway. Shaft's is a little bit off, but then sometimes Liefeld heads just kind of go off. So I don't know if Rob drew those in or if Merritt just traced them. I mean, he does trace an awful lot. So I guess it wouldn't exactly be surprising. So Youngblood lands down with the Suprematons acting as the signalers. That's all right. And the fisherman watches them walk in. He's hanging out with Toby, who is going over the evidence of Die Hard's submitted, his visual data. So this is something Toby was going to be doing kind of constantly throughout the trial, because there's like 6 months worth of backlog to sort through if he feels like it. And at this point, he's back at some kind of Youngblood team function, like barbecue, something like that. And Fisherman's getting a little bit impatient when all of a sudden Toby says, Die Hard must be going inside the house. There, look on the bookshelf. Do you see it? And they're like, my God, does that house belong to who I think it does? Toby's like, I'm afraid so, Bryce. The float is bobbing, and I think I've got a big one on the line. So Fisherman's going to go ask Supreme to send the Suprematons to that address. We're not going to say what the address is yet, because that would spoil the ending. And Toby has to prepare himself to get to a big empty hallway, because that's where court's going to be held today. So Toby starts out by saying I'd originally intended on calling John Prophet to recount his part in the story of the magic book. Unfortunately, Mr. Prophet appears to be absent today. Not sure why that is, unless Alan Moore decided maybe he wanted to revisit that later, doing a Prophet series of some kind. So instead, he's going to call up Blake Barron, formerly Batlin Barron, the Nick Fury stand-in, who is now the occult agent. And yeah, some of these layouts really suck. It's funny thinking back to some of the old Extreme books where Merritt was strictly credited with layouts on certain books, like he was good at them, and it's like, I don't know why we would ever think that. Anyway, we're going to get a fun back and forth between Toby and Blake Barron, where Toby's like, I understand you currently work for a government agency involved in paranormal research, known as the Veil. And Baron is like, I know of no such organization. If I did, I'm sure its existence would be classified. He's like, oh, okay, let me try that a different way. How long have you and the Veil known about the existence of the book we've been discussing? And Baron's like, Mr. King, as I believe I've already said, there is no such organization as the Veil. Now, my personal experience with the book I can talk about. And that's a fun shot. Those are some nice shadows. But yeah, we're going to go back to the 40s. So this is the one drawn by Jeff Johnson. I don't think I recognize the name, although he might have popped up in something else I reviewed. I can't remember. I like his style a fair bit. It's very solid. And he's got a good sense of shadows as well. So we got to do a quick flashback to the original Batlin Baron story, where he was working with the Phantom Aviator. The Aviator caught some shrapnel and handed the book off to the battalion mascot. And this mascot would hang on to the book because nobody suspected it was anything other than just a book. Baron figures that Smith must have worked out what the book was, and not only that, he must have rewritten what the book could actually do, because the next time they saw him, he was hanging out with the Allies, and his book could conjure characters from fiction. So this is the character who would become Storybook Smith, who Alan Moore has featured before in Supreme, I believe. But yeah, no, he's just a dude with a book, and then every once in a while he summons, like, D'Artagnan to fight for him. A little bit about the progression of Mr. Smith's life, where, he was having fun with the Allies for a while, fighting crime and all that, but in his latter days, he was working as a TV host, showing late-night B-movies. And his drinking began around then, continuing through the 60s until he became a derelict, vanishing in the mid-70s. Poor kid, that's all I know. So I think we can ascertain the way the book works, that he lost it at some point, and his life just kind of fell apart. But anyway, that's the end of Baron's testimony. Toby says, you've been very helpful, Major Baron. The court record will reflect that. Baron says, I'd rather it didn't. Major Blake Baron died in a car crash in 1972. His body was unrecognizable. I was never here. Okay, bye. And he floats away. So the next thing we're going to do, we got a little bit more evidence. Basically another witness testimony. That's what this whole thing boils down to. The whole story of the book could have been told in a number of interesting ways. The way that Alan Moore thought was interesting at the time was to do it all in snippets through witness testimonies. So anyway, the next testimony we're getting is actually a letter that's been written by a woman who was bedridden. Otherwise, she would have been there. And it's going to be from the ex-wife of Storybook Smith. So we get another flashback. This one's going to be drawn by Rick Veitch. It's a fun one. This is going to be drawn in his flashback style that he would often use in Supreme. I'm honestly not a huge fan of that style myself. I think it looks kind of ugly. But the story's usually good enough that it's not that offensive or anything. And if nothing else, Rick Veitch is a hell of a storyteller. So the narrator tells us about how she first met Storybook Smith and how he was already a crime fighter. He would summon up fictional characters to punish lawbreakers, that kind of thing, as he summons up Frankenstein's monster to eliminate the crime condor. We just saw that in the 2017 version of Youngblood #1. That's a hell of a callback. Although I wouldn't be surprised if that character got featured in some other issue in between this coming out and 2017. And they tell the story about how the Allies found out about Storybook Smith after he, did some daring rescue, and they all wanted to be his friend. This goofy, buck-toothed, red-haired guy. Man, these superheroes can't get enough of him. It's almost like somebody wrote it for him in a script. And, Glory throws her arms around him, she gives him a big kiss, all that shit. Everybody's so happy to see him. The narrator's like, my Sam was asked to join the Allied Superman first as mascot, then as a full member. Things couldn't have worked out better if he'd written them himself. And then continues with, maybe he did. Maybe that's how he got me into bed with him as well. We had the strangest late-night conversations, as they're talking about future children they might have. And Storybook Smith has a very clear idea of who his daughter would be. He's like, she'll be blonde and beautiful, and one day she'll be a famous superhero just like me. It's already penciled in, sweetheart. I've made the necessary adjustments. My family's dirt poor, but she'll do fine. And when I asked him what he meant, he showed me a picture of his great-grandmother, a servant girl named Eliza Smith. And that is actually a name we've heard before. I didn't say it, but I just kind of forgot that might be important. That is the name of Deliverance Drew's servant girl. Yeah, same picture there and there. So, the child of Deliverance Drew and Eliza Smith, apparently, would go on to become one of the parents of Storybook Smith. That's a pretty crazy revelation. And he said something I didn't understand about his book being part of family destiny. It's like, well, yeah, no, it certainly seems like it now. So anyway, life went on. The Allies disbanded in 1950. And Storybook Smith kept up the crime-fighting thing for a while, but it was really more of a hobby than like a full-time obsession. I imagine things got very silly for Storybook Smith during the 50s, as he summons the big bad wolf here to take care of some bank robbers. From there, he moved into doing short horror stories on the radio. Sometimes he'd summon up the characters to narrate their bits, as he summons up Captain Ahab here. And then there's later bits where his girl discovers that he's summoned up women as well. So characters like Scarlett O'Hara and Madame Bovary. And he's like, baby, I can explain. And he still kept having these ideas about who his daughter was going to be. His daughter was very important to him, apparently, and also very important to the story. He's like, I worked it all out. She'll go diving as a teenager. Something wonderful will give her superpowers. And his girl's just like, you're nuts. So I think we're starting to get a pretty good idea of who that's meant to be. But then things just kept getting worse for Storybook Smith because he's just kind of getting too involved in this story. So things got sloppy around 1958. Sammy was scoring opium from Dr. Fu Manchu, and we had lots of junkie friends hanging around the apartment. And that's how it happened, where they came home one day and they'd been robbed. Whoever it was took the hi-fi and her Charlie Mingus platters. But Storybook Smith isn't worried about that because they took something else. They took the book and he was shattered. It says every day you go out searching for it to no avail. And that was when he started going into the late night double bill on Shock Shop. It says unfortunately he couldn't compete with Vampira and the others because, no cleavage. But the thing that broke him up the most was that he never had a daughter. He'd been so sure of his prediction and it hadn't come true. And he started turning to drinking, and one day he just walked out and never came back, left a "I'm sorry, I love you" note. And then, of course, a week after that, the doctor told the woman that she was pregnant. And one day, years later, when the daughter was a teenager, she went out diving. You know the rest. And as with Mr. King, I've told you all I know. I hope it helps you catch whoever it was that did this terrible thing and took my beautiful little girl away from me. Yours faithfully, Miranda Creel. So, of course, the daughter of Storybook Smith and Miranda Creel turned out to be Riptide, who can trace her lineage up through Storybook Smith back to Deliverance Drew. So this isn't just a matter of a single isolated murder. There are generations wrapped up in this. And of course, Shaft is shocked. He's like, my God, Marcus, can you believe this stuff? It's incredible. And Sentinel's just like, yeah, because he's thinking about some other things right now. And all this stuff, it's pretty much the same as if Rob had drawn it, really. I think it's just a matter of Rob didn't want to draw the boring pages anymore, so he handed them all off to Merritt and Cedric. So as Toby's filibustering here, Supreme comes up and whispers something in his ear. So the business of him sending the Suprematons off to that address they saw earlier, that's borne fruit now. As he announces bringing in Exhibit A, the Suprematons bring in a suitcase, and they bring in Sentinel's wife as well. Uh-oh, that don't look too good. And off in the corner here, Troll's like, shit, that's it. It's in that box. I can feel it from here. Shaft's like, what the fuck is going on? Why is your wife here? And Sentinel's just kind of like, I don't know. Like, he doesn't even want to say anything at this point. He has to know where it's going, but at the same time, it's like, there's a slim chance that it's not. And maybe I can fix this all later anyway. So Toby's going to go into his final spiel here. He's like, ladies and gentlemen, what I have in this box was found at the residence of Mr. Marcus Langston earlier today. He says, I wonder if Mr. Langston would like the opportunity to explain to the court what this is and how he came by it. And of course, Sentinel doesn't say anything. He's like, no, that's too bad. A lot of legal cases can be very frustrating. There's always somebody who refuses to come clean. There's always some part of the story that never gets filled in. That's not going to be a problem today, though. Mr. Langston can refuse to testify, but we're still going to hear the story. That's because what I have in this box isn't just another piece of evidence. It isn't just another part of the story. It is the story. So the book itself has been unveiled, and it was sitting in Sentinel's house. And everyone's shocked. Laurie's like, Jesus Christ, it's been millions of years. It looks exactly the same. And Toby opens the book and starts reading, which seems like it might be a little bit like irregular for a courtroom. But I guess this is a super courtroom. There's like super rules. We can just go ahead with it. So now we're going to get the final story, and this is going to be the story of Sentinel. And we're going to get Ian Churchill doing the art on this one, which is a nice change, I think. Honestly, he's a good sub-in for Stephen Platt at this point. Stephen Platt was handling the flashback sequences where you need an extreme artist back in issues 1 and 2. Ian Churchill's going to handle it in this one. I think that's appropriate. And we start with a pretty fun splash of Sentinel here. Looking better than I think he has in most iterations, really. So he's been called the first modern superhuman, the first prominent hero to emerge after most of the 60s champions, myself included, disappeared in early 1970. Founder and leader of Team Youngblood, he has risen to become perhaps the premier member of the world's most famous super team. But where has he risen from? To answer that, we must return with this book as our guide to the New York of the 1950s and to the troubled household of the Langston family. So the deal with this, it starts out with young Marcus Langston as the product of a broken home, where his dad's a junkie and his mother's a streetwalker. Anyway, the way it starts out is that his father one day came home with this book, where it was part of a haul that had been stolen from an apartment. This would have been Storybook Smith's apartment. The dad figured the book was worthless, so he gave it to Marcus. Marcus read it and realized that it was something much more than that. Most importantly, he was able to find his own story, didn't like what he saw there, where he starts out as a petty criminal at 14, a pregnant girlfriend by 15, a mild heroin habit by 17, and at 19, Marcus Langston is shot dead robbing a liquor store to pay off his dealer. So obviously Marcus wasn't a big fan of that, but he had seen how earlier stories had been crossed out and written over, so he figured I can do that shit too. And what he decides to do is he makes himself an inventor. One day he designs a cybernetic battle suit and gets a high-paying job with the military. He's 22, already dead for 3 years in the original version of the story, but wildly successful in the new version that he's written for himself. And I got some problems with this particular origin for Sentinel, to be honest. I guess mostly because, originally Sentinel was just a member of the team. He was just another superhero, and it actually wasn't a bad thing. That him being black wasn't really played up. It wasn't so much a rags to riches story. I don't know that it was really like a riches to riches story or anything. It was just seemed to be he was a very smart kid who, built himself a battle suit and joined a super team. Whereas this version, kind of takes him back to his childhood was a stereotype. I'm not too fond of that. I feel like there's shitty childhoods he could have come up with that didn't have that particular stereotype. But anyway, that was just a little tangent. Moving on here. Pleased with the results of his revisions, Marcus starts making further changes. He becomes a superhero. Other superheroes appear so he can have buddies, but he makes sure he remains best. He writes it so that he gets to be the bestest superhero in the bestest super team in the world, and it still isn't enough. He writes himself stunning adventures, although sometimes they're too tame for the old embittered Marcus who's still inside him. And then continues. He writes himself stunning adventures, although there's just repeated the text accidentally. There isn't enough shooting. He doesn't get to kill enough people. I'm not sure when exactly he would have been embittered before. I mean, you can certainly see how he would be embittered, but it wasn't mentioned or anything. So it just feels like we're saying he's embittered, which explains his next actions. Anyway, continuing. Around the middle 1980s, Marcus had grown bored of this. He decided to write a nastier, shadowier, and more violent world for himself and for everybody else, and our entire reality changed and darkened. And, fittingly, the image here is the pose from The Dark Knight Returns, because that was kind of the moment when the comics world changed and became darker and nastier. It's a little funny that that's what he brings it all back to, when, Alan Moore himself, the guy writing this, had just as big a part to play in the darkening of the comics world with Watchmen. But I don't imagine there's a singular pose that could be inserted here that would represent Watchmen like there is with Dark Knight, and it would be a little bit awkward if you somehow fit a smiley face button in there. Anyway, gone was the naive wonder of the 40s, the exuberance of the 50s, and the nobility of the 60s. Working a dreadful reverse alchemy, Marcus Langston let our world slide from a golden age to a silver age and finally to a dark age. Now heroes motivated only by money or psychopathology stalked a paranoid apocalyptic landscape of post-nuclear mutants and bazooka-wielding cyborgs. And this is Judgment Day, and we're going to get Alan Moore's judgment on where comics has gone. He's like, our universe had been sucked into a bad action movie of constant, meaningless mayhem, and the star of that movie was its writer and director, Marcus Langston. So I gotta wonder if Liefeld even caught that Alan Moore was describing, everything he's ever produced there. With a fair bit of disdain, but I got to imagine he's aware that he had his part in creating that world. So now we've established, how Marcus got the book and what he did with it. And now we're going to move on to what happened to it, which is that he lost it several months ago at a team barbecue. And that was because Riptide saw it and recognized it. I'd said earlier how she was, keeping an eye out for it for her entire life, how she knew it was kind of part of her heritage. And then once the book was missing, Sentinel realized who must have taken it. He went to Riptide's room while she was out walking. Toby figures she probably returned early and surprised him. And using her power to siphon moisture from the air, she hit him with a miniature wave soaking the carpet. But, that didn't do anything to his armor, naturally. Through all this, Shaft is just like, this is fucked up, man. You gotta say something. So the wave didn't do anything to Marcus, it just made him mad. He figures maybe he was thinking about the past he'd written his way out of, and the past that had threatened to reclaim him if he ever lost the book. And whatever the reason, he hit the already soaked Riptide with a suit-generated shock, stunning her and fusing the apartment's electrics. By this time, he could afford no witnesses, battering the already semi-conscious girl through her living room. He bludgeoned her to death. And then after that, he returned to the lobby with the book. And he wasn't worried about covering anything up, because he'd just write a new culprit. So about 20 minutes after Langston killed Riptide, he started to compose the following entry. It's the 30th of August in Washington, the first shivering witch breath of fall on the air, which is the first line of Judgment Day Issue 1. Mickey Toombs just turned 30. If you asked him, Mickey would say he'd been out celebrating. And Night Saber's like, what the fuck is this? And then, of course, he wrote him stumbling to the elevator, taking it up to Riptide's quarters, not finding her body, and collapsing on her bed, falling unconscious. And this, of course, was the thing he was writing at the beginning of the story, when Night Saber stumbled through the reception area. And Shaft kind of reacts beside him, but Sentinel's face is a stoic mask Liefeld captures perfectly. And Toby gets to give his last lawyer's speech here, wrapping everything up. Sentinel's wife is just in shambles here. She's like, oh God, me, our marriage, he wrote it all. And Toby wraps up by saying, come on, Mr. Langston, tell us, how does the story end? And Rob finally gets to draw a fun page as Sentinel leaps down from the gallery yelling, happily ever after, you Ivy League asshole. Flies in and knocks Toby aside, grabs the book, I think, and then immediately fries it because that's the same hand that he uses to blast at Savage Dragon. That's probably indestructible anyway. Suprema and Supreme take him down after that. I'm not sure how, maybe Super Breath? It's a little hard to tell. But it doesn't matter at that time because he's got the book. He's like, I only need to change one line. Then the entire Citadel exploded and only Sentinel escaped with his life. At which point Shaft says, Marcus, your literary career is over. And he shoots the book out of his hand with an arrow, which I guess Marcus just didn't see coming there. Book goes flying out of his hand over, I guess, a balcony? Maybe there's a balcony in there somewhere. Well, I mean, there's no background, so I guess we just got to take his word for it. And Marcus goes diving after it, which is when the fisherman is going to leap into action by casting his line and reeling in Sentinel. Sentinel's beside himself. He's like, no, this isn't it. This isn't how it ends. I've got to rewrite it just a little more time. One more revision. And they end with the line, we're sorry, Mark, but you've hit the deadline. Only thing here, I guess, is that the book popping out of the panel border, that's an alright addition. Everything else, whatever, it's fine. I don't know what exactly he was trying to do here. I just know it didn't work. Okay, and that is the end of the trial. And essentially the end of the event. Supreme's going to share a drink with Prophet here. And Prophet's like, yeah, man, I'm kind of sorry I missed all that. That sounds kind of crazy. What happened to Sentinel anyway? So Sentinel apparently was put in Supreme's Hell of Mirrors, which is one of the trophies in his trophy room, I think. I'm not sure who does the art on this. This might be Cedric Nacone. Doesn't look bad at all, really. It's better than any of the Merit stuff, and it's better than the Liefeld, at least when he's doing the boring pages. Oh, we've also got Toby talking with Keith. Toby says it's ironic that Sentinel should end up in a hell given his family's previous connection with the book. Gloria's like, oh yeah, you mentioned a connection with the book. He did do that earlier in the trial. What was up with that? Apparently, he was a descendant of Kid Thunder. The whole reason that Kid Thunder wore a mask and gloves and the whole was because he was black. He was an escaped slave named Judd Langston. And then he brings it back to the curse of Deliverance Drew, who said, damn you, and all your seed. Damn them to hell. So apparently that curse stuck. And then we're going to end by sending off all of our heroes. Youngblood's been disbanded, but some of the pieces of Youngblood are going to get swept up by Waxy Doyle, who's now a businessman. He's going to offer Shaft a job working for him, and that's going to lead into the 1998 Youngblood series by Alan Moore and Steve Scrose. We did already cover that one if you want to check it out. It turned out to be pretty good. Apparently the Fisherman and Glory and Supreme have been talking with Roman, and they're talking about maybe reforming the Allies. It's like, well, yeah, no, it's been like 40 years at this point, maybe 50. None of us have aged a day. Might be fun to have another crack at it. And Toby ends by saying it's funny. For more than 10 years, that book plunged our world into a grim moral darkness. Maybe that's finally over, now that Alan Moore is writing the awesome universe. And Glory says, I suppose that all depends on who gets the book next. Like if Alan Moore has to leave in a year to go found the ABC line. Will somebody else come in to save the awesome universe? Probably not. Probably the company will go under in a couple of years. plunging all these characters into darkness yet again. Fisherman thinks it must have been destroyed when it fell from this height. Glory's like, no, nothing ever happened to it. It was made by the most dangerous god of all. She says, I remember his terrifying, clever eyes. I remember the way he laughed when he gave it to my mother before Earth was made. Trust me, Bryce. The story is still going on. As it falls to Earth in front of some homeless girl by the looks of it, who's like, okay, who the hell threw that at me? Until she takes a look at it and goes, oh, wow. So the book can always come back now. It can influence further events in the awesome universe, or it can just kind of pass into memory. Either way would have worked fine for Alan Moore. If he ever wanted to revisit it, probably wouldn't. He spent an awful lot of time on it in this one. I guess it depends on what this girl's like, whether she's inherently embittered like Sentinel or more of an Aladdin-style diamond in the rough, and what she decides the book can do. But chances are her story's going to get better anyway. And then we get one more missive from Jeff Loeb here, just a bunch of thank yous for the event. And there's that back cover with the joined triptych. Would have been better if they had the third piece that we could link up with the other two, but that's okay, I guess. This is advertising the trade paperback, which is going to be coming out soon. Okay, so that is it for Judgment Day. It's a pretty good story. There's parts of it that don't quite hold up as well as I remember. That bit with the ending with Sentinel, I'm not a fan of how that went. And the earlier on you were into the story, the clumsier those flashback sequences felt. But it did start to merge together pretty well. It also felt very incongruous, getting this, dry courtroom drama with Liefeld just bored off his ass, trying to draw people sitting in chairs for panel after panel. Maybe the most interesting part of this is how Alan Moore is laying the groundwork for all sorts of future projects if he wants to follow up on those. It's been a while since I've read this. I didn't realize just how much stuff he got scattered all over the place. It's like a shotgun effect. One thing I should mention is how Rob Liefeld has described this event since it came out, is that he describes it as the O.J. Simpson trial with superheroes. From what I understand, part of it is down to the media circus element, but that really wasn't touched on very much at all. The only other thing is just that Sentinel's black and Riptide's white. So he acts like he caught Alan Moore slipping something in there. It's like there's not a whole lot there linking it, really. For one thing, I don't believe Sentinel and Riptide have a relationship. That's kind of one aspect. I don't know, it's a weird element. It's almost like I don't know if Rob Liefeld maybe just doesn't like the fact that Alan Moore homed in on Sentinel, because Sentinel is one of the earliest characters that Rob Liefeld created. And this story does make it a little difficult to use Sentinel in the future as a hero anyway. It can be done. It kind of requires a writer who knows what he's doing. So, Liefeld's going to hire a couple of writers in the future. That could totally happen. With how the book did, it didn't do great. It didn't do terrible. The first issue sold 35,000 copies. The second and third seemed to have sold in the neighborhood of about 25,000. Probably not the return Liefeld was hoping for with all the talent he recruited for this. But the other thing about this, of course, is that this is just the worst time to try selling comics. July of 1997, the top-ranked book is Uncanny X-Men number 347, which sells almost 166,000 copies, which is like a fifth of what it would have sold 5 years previous. So 5 years previous, which is kind of where Rob Liefeld's head is still at a bit, this being the 91st ranked comic for the month, would have still made a decent profit probably. But yeah, man, in 97, it doesn't really make a whole lot at all. And there are not going to be very many comics from Awesome over the next 3 years that are actually going to make more than it. Did all right for an independent publisher, but certainly not what Rob Liefeld was hoping for. So wasn't making enough money, was paying out huge amounts to Alan Moore every month. Working with capital that he'd gotten from Scott Rosenberg to fund his entire organization now because he couldn't use any kind of funds from Image anymore, and constantly under siege due to lawsuits from Image Comics and more pointedly Todd McFarlane. So all that kind of came to a head. 2000, Awesome shuts its doors. A year or so later, Alan Moore publishes refined versions of the ideas he came up with for Awesome Entertainment and publishes them through the ABC line. So that story went okay, I guess. I enjoy those ABC comics a whole lot more than I enjoyed just about any Awesome comics. So anyway, that is going to do it for Judgment Day. Almost certainly wasn't the event Liefeld was hoping for, but it's not a bad little story on its own. Anyway, that is going to do it for Judgment Day. Probably not the event Rob Liefeld was hoping for, but it was a decent story. With some good art by some old school guys, a couple of new school guys, and some pretty bad art from Rob Liefeld. So it's got a little bit of everything, really. So that's where we'll wrap it up. Thanks very much for watching, guys. If you got this far, don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Right about now, you should be seeing a link to my Patreon. If you want, you can go check that out as well. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.